Okay, so I'm super excited to be here again with all of you guys today. We have Mr. Dean Heffta is going to be teaching us today. He's the founder of Claris Results, and he does a great job speaking, and specifically, I've heard him speak on communication several times, and he's just done a great job. But he has lots of topics, and he's an outstanding coach and teacher. And so, without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dean. As a reminder, we will all be muted, but you can certainly use the chat box if you have any questions, and I'm going to be trying to watch that. And if you'd like to unmute yourself and make a comment, that's certainly fine too. But to keep it as quiet and so that we can all hear as best as possible and the recording doesn't pick up any background noise, we will stay muted like we did before. So we're super excited to have you with us, Dean. So thank you for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and mute myself so that you can get started, okay?
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. And I was really looking forward to connecting with you all. And the topic for today, the title for today is Being Heard. And it's really about communication. And I believe that the fundamental part of communication is our desire to be heard or having a sense of being understood. And what we're going to talk about today are some ways of thinking about how we can increase the likelihood that the people around us feel heard, that we're in an environment where we have this sense of open communication, and some of the things to be thinking about. And so we'll cover some different ground as we go through that. But when we think about our own experiences, this sense of communication and understanding is real, right? You look at situations where maybe there's been mistakes that happen in the workplace, or even situations where you thought you understood but realized you didn't. You know, just a couple of months ago, I was doing a training for a company, and so I'm kind of distracted, and I had gotten a text from my wife, and she'd asked if I would pick up a prescription for my son, who was battling flu at that time or some illness, and I responded immediately, yes, I'll take care of it. And she said it was at Kroger, and I glanced the text, and I get to Kroger, and they say, oh, yeah, I spoke to your wife. That prescription is actually at the East Peoria Kroger. And in that moment, I knew, this was my fault. I didn't take the time to really understand and review what she had sent to me. So this sense of being heard isn't just in communication that we have when we're talking to somebody, it's in all of the interactions we have. And it can lead to inefficiency, mistakes, errors, frustration. All of that's tied to communication. And so what happened? I was in Washington, and I texted my wife. I said, I'm sorry, I screwed up. I'm headed to East Peoria to get it where you originally told me to get it. And so that added more time to my day and inefficiency. And so we have those situations that come up. And as individuals, there's some things that I think we can be more aware of, tools that regardless of if I'm a driver, a manager, you name it, whatever role I'm in, I have the ability to positively impact the communication that happens in any organization. And an organization could be a friend group, it could be my family, it could be the office people that I work with, it could be whatever group that I find myself in. That's an organization. And I, regardless of if I'm in charge of it or not, have an influence on how communication happens. So that's the title, is just being heard. And so I think there's other examples that can highlight the consequence when we don't really hear. I like this quote. It's, the biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has occurred. How true is that? We get frustrated because we believe somebody has understood what we said, or we think we know what they meant by what they said. And that just isn't the case so often. And, there's big consequences. In World War II, we know about kind of how things ended when it came to the Pacific campaign. But what often we forget about is that the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima was actually the result of a misinterpretation of one word. And that one word was mokusatsu. So as the war was coming to a head, message was sent to the Emperor of Japan saying, are you going to unconditionally surrender, or do we have to invade? And the response came in a word. It was mokusatsu. Here's the problem. So we think about, do people hear us? Do people understand us? That's a word that has multiple interpretations. It has many meanings depending on the context. It can mean we need some time to think about it. Or it can mean that that question is not worthy of our comment and we oppose it, right? So there's a whole range of meanings. And in the interpretation process, the latter was taken. And that basically led to the interpretation that Japan said, no, we're not going to surrender. And that precipitated then the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. So there's real consequences, even if in our lives there's small consequences. Miscommunication can lead to behaviors that we don't like, results that we don't want, just general issues. And so a lot of times what you see, what I experience is when we haven't felt heard, or when somebody doesn't feel like they've been heard, maybe it's a kid in school. What do we see? What happens? They start acting up. I've seen this at the grocery store, right? You've been at the grocery store and the parent is ignoring their kid completely. And so then the kid starts acting up, maybe knocking something off the shelf or making some noise. And eventually this whole thing just blows up. And what you see happening is the kid is acting badly just to get some attention, to feel like they'll be heard. And what we know, one of the things that I teach is something called process communication model, and it gives us some indication of helping us to understand there are specific behaviors that give us a sense when people feel like they're not being heard. They're in distress. These are distress behaviors that we can observe. So if you've ever seen somebody become over controlling, say, I'll do it myself, that way I know it's going to be done the right way. That is a distress behavior. If you've ever seen somebody, not able to make a decision and then make mistakes that they normally wouldn't make, that is a distress behavior. If you've ever seen somebody blame others for what's happening, hey, don't pin this on me, this is not my fault, that's a distress behavior. Maybe you've seen someone break the rules so they can get what they want. It's distress behavior. Maybe somebody just completely vanishes. Where did they go? Whenever things get tough, they just disappear. Or maybe you see somebody, the more distressed they get, the more they push their beliefs and crusade for what they think is right. See, all of these are different behaviors that we have when we're in distress, and it negatively impacts communication. And they give us windows into an understanding that people aren't feeling heard. And so they push and they push and they push and they do these things. And one of these is going to be our primary way that we go into distress. And so what happens then is when we see the other 5 behaviors, we think, those people are crazy. There's something wrong with them. They must have made a choice to behave that way. So we can look at this as indications that maybe we can change how we approach our interaction with somebody. And a big part of this is our self-awareness in the process. So what I really believe is that inside each of us, there is this desire to be seen, to be heard, to be understood, to feel respected. and to be connected with the people around us. And as an organization, as individuals, as teams, as families, the more we can connect with people, the more they feel an openness to share, the more productive, the better problem solving, the more efficient we're going to be. Google a few years ago wanted to answer the question, what is it about some of our teams that make them so much more productive than others? So they invested millions of dollars into research that they called Project Aristotle. And what they identified is there was a handful of characteristics that separated the best performing teams from the rest. And at the very top of the list of characteristics that made them unique was something that they called psychological safety. And creating that environment of psychological safety, you find people are much more willing to share their concerns, to identify things that they don't think are working well, to try new things, to risk new approaches, because they feel like if something doesn't go well, or if it isn't received well, they're not going to be, quote unquote, punished for it or treated badly. And so that's really on the leader's shoulders to say, am I fostering an environment where there's safety for people to communicate? And what that ties right back to is this an environment where I feel like I am being heard? It's all going back to, do I feel heard? And so I want to spend a little time on a handful of ways of thinking about this, things that we can do as individuals to positively impact communication in our environment. And the first one I'm going to call is showing the way. Showing the way forward for others, or demonstrating for others what it is that I would like more of. And there's a leadership book called The Leadership Challenge. It was written over 30 years ago now. And what they found in their research was there's a handful of practices of exceptional leadership. And one of them is called model the way. And that really ties into this. It is, what is it that I'm expecting from others? That's the thing that I need to provide myself. So, maybe I'm in charge of a work team, and I really want people, anytime they see a piece of trash, to pick it up. But if they never see me stop and pick up a piece of trash, I continually walk by it. Well, there's a gap there. There's a gap between what I'm saying and what I'm doing. And there's a quote that says, your actions speak so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying. And so we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard of being able to model the things that we want from others, show the way forward. And there's a few things that I want to talk about as we dive into this. This is a great quote. If you want something, give it. And this can be really challenging for us when we feel like we haven't been heard. And I've seen this situation. My wife works at a school, 8th grade, and one of the scenarios that ends up playing out, I've seen this in other schools too, between, let's say, two teachers or between a teacher and an administrator, is the administrator maybe didn't listen to a teacher. And then that turns into a sense that the teacher didn't listen to the administrator. And you have this ongoing, permanent lack of being heard. And there's this sense like, oh, well, you didn't listen to me, and so I'm not going to listen to you. And so how does that work for communication? Well, it doesn't. It means that there isn't communication happening. And so at some point, an individual has to say, you know what? I need to be the one that opens the door. I need to model the way. I need to be the one that demonstrates listening. And then we can begin opening the channels of communication. And a big part of that is the acknowledgement that we have for others. When maybe somebody comes up to us and says, boy, I've got a real issue. I'm gonna have to leave early today. I've got some family things going on. Well, there's a couple of things that we could do in that moment. Our brains might be focused on what's got to get done and the project at hand, and it's like, no, we already let everybody know. This is priority number one, and I got to have you here for it. So right in that moment, what we really chose was not to acknowledge the situation, but really stay locked into what we've already determined as the priority. And it's a missed opportunity. So when we acknowledge others, that doesn't mean that we have to give up our authority or hand over the decision making. There is a moment, it could take 30 seconds to say, wow, I hope everything's okay. Tell me more of what's going on. So in that moment, even if it's for 30 seconds, putting the spotlight on the person who is reaching out is a form of acknowledgement. And we can acknowledge people in different ways. We can repeat back what we think we heard them say. That type of reiteration of their message is a way of affirming and restating what we think we heard. And when people hear their words back, it does a handful of things that helps them to know that I took the time to really hear you, and that it's important that I understand you, because hearing and understanding are different things. And so when I repeat that back, they say, yes, that is exactly right. I can identify when, maybe they say, I'm having, my mom is having some real health problems. And I can acknowledge them by saying, wow, that has to be really hard for you and your family right now. How can I be helpful for you? Right? It's a very you-focused moment. And they, in that moment, feel like, okay, I am important. Remember, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be connected, we want to experience importance and significance. So the other thing that we can do as a part of this is, if we go back to show the way and we think about how is it that I want people to treat me, then that means that's the standard that we have to live up to on how we have to treat others. So if I want to be acknowledged, I can look for opportunities in my day-to-day of how do I acknowledge others. I can also seek understanding. So when I seek understanding, it is a level of humility to really reach out and say, I need more help understanding what you're thinking about this. I need to understand some of the dynamics going here. And whenever I'm seeking understanding, I'm communicating to others. I don't have all the answers. I need your help. I need more understanding, and I can only get that from you. And seeking understanding is a habit, and it takes some self-awareness to be able to say, okay, I need to take a moment. I don't have all the answers right now, and I need to seek some understanding, and that requires questions. And the best questions that we can use to seek understanding begin with what and how. And they don't begin with why. A why question is actually a very defense-inducing question. Think about when somebody asks you, why did this get put back this way? Why hasn't that been cleaned up yet? Why weren't you here sooner? Those types of questions immediately put us on the defensive. We have to defend our behavior, we have to defend our belief, we have to defend our opinion. Why questions enlist defensiveness. And often they are focused on the past. What and how questions enlist people, they bring people into the conversation, and they increase our creativity, and they're typically focused on the future. What's something that we need to consider now that we have new information? See, I'm growing understanding, and I'm pulling people into that, seeking understanding. That brings us into this next element of how do we invite other people in? See, if we go back and say, what is it that I want to feel heard? Well, I want to be asked, invited, enlisted. Okay, that means that I need to be able to do the same thing with and for others. When I mention questions, there are questions that we can use that can invite people into the conversation. And again, we can feel like, oh man, if I ask these questions, they're either going to be annoyed, or I have to follow what they think we should do, or things like that. But really, I was doing a training a few months ago, and an individual, there's a group of about 40 in there. And this individual, he said, I don't really share many ideas in meetings anymore. I said, oh, well, what's changed? What's going on? He said, well, it used to be I would have an idea of something that I think we should do or a change I think we should make. And after letting people know that several times in a meeting, like I think we should do it this way, or I think we should do it that way, or we ought to do it like this, with those ideas and people not adapting those or implementing them, I just figure, what's the point? So that is a great point, because a lot of people face that. But here's something to consider. Is your desire that people just listen to you? Or is your desire that you improve your team and the organization? Well, I want things to get better. Okay, well, if that's truly the case, then what happens if we shift our approach around how we introduce the idea? See, when we invite others into the conversation, we increase our ability to solve problems. We increase the commitment that people have in the solution, and we increase the odds that people are going to feel heard around their perspective. And so shifting away, I said, here's something to try. Instead of coming out in the meeting and saying, here's what I think we should do. Because the challenge with that, when I say that, is I've now taken a position that leaves the other people with only two choices. They either have to accept what I've proposed and implement, or discard it. That's what they're left with, because they haven't been a part of the process. And when we introduce things like that, we're actually removing their ability to speak into it, to be a part of the problem solving process. Because here's the real thing is, we're not trying to come up with solutions until we've gotten really clear on the question. So as an organization, we have to be really clear on what is the question we're trying to answer before we spend a lot of time trying to solve the problem. And I might be driving down the road and come up with a great idea, come into the meeting, say, here's what I think we should do. As it turns out, that idea was not very well thought through. So we can use comments and phrases that actually let people in and invite people in to improve the process. And that helps them to feel heard. It helps me to be a part of the process and contribute to it. So we can use phrases like, would it help if I changed this part of the process? See, that's very different than coming out and saying, I'm going to change this part of the process, or I've already changed this part of the process. When I say, would it help if I, now people can simply answer the question. They can say, that's interesting. There is a chance that we could shrink the time that we do this. And what if not only you did that, but we did this too? That would help even more. See, now they've enlisted, and I'm finding out. Maybe somebody says, I don't think it would help. I don't think that change would make a difference. Let's talk about it. I can use phrases like, what if we did this? See, I'm asking what if. I'm speaking to possibilities. I'm not trying to position myself as being the authority or the only one that knows what's going on. Maybe I'm talking to a vendor or a customer, and it's simply, rather than saying you should, I can test their interest. Would you be interested in? Are you interested in? Maybe I'm new to the team, and I know that I haven't experienced everything that the team has experienced. I haven't tried everything that we've tried. I can ask a question by introducing this idea. Have you ever tried this type of scheduling system? The other person might say, no, I've never heard of it. Tell me more. Oh, well, here's what my experience has been. That's very different dialogue. That's very different conversation than coming out and saying, oh, here's the system you should be using. I can't believe you're not using it already. It's have you ever. I love this one. Hey, this might be a crazy idea and it probably won't work. But what would happen if we, see, I'm already I'm already saying it's crazy. I'm already saying it probably won't work, but I'm putting it out there. And now we can begin to start having dialogue about it. And in that process, I'm helping other people feel like they can be heard in this problem solving process. And I'm increasing the likelihood that they're going to hear me as well, because I'm not giving them a binary choice of either accept my idea or reject it. I'm really focusing on how do we solve the problem more effectively. And so when I do that, I slowly begin to influence how other people introduce ideas as well. Subconsciously, they begin seeing that it isn't just about who has the best opinion, the strongest opinion. It is about how do we invite people into the conversation. So regardless of my position, that type of communication can positively impact our culture. And sometimes we can fear, well, once they share their opinion, they're going to want to insist that it gets implemented. But for many people, it isn't about having their way. It isn't about insisting that other people do what they want. They end up there after being frustrated that they feel like no one is listening to them. But the reality is, I want to have my say, but that doesn't mean I have to have my way. This goes back to I want to feel like I've been heard. I want to be able to have dialogue and discussion about it. The third element I call change the channel. Change the channel, right? And in process communication model, one of the things that we teach is all of us use 4 different channels. I'm going to introduce you to the channels. And one of them is going to be our most comfortable and easiest channel to use. It's our go-to, it's our default channel. And what happens when we're interacting with people that use a very different channel is communication can break down. And so in the process, the good news is I have access to using all 4 of these channels at any given time. I can do it, but I have to be aware of what's happening right now. So one of the channels, and actually the primary, most commonly used channel in business, we're going to call ask. Technically, it's called the requestive channel, but for easy language, I just call it ask. Ask is the channel where we communicate information. What time are they showing up? How many people are going to be along? How much is that going to cost? When are we going to leave? All of these things that are related to information and data and facts and opinions. What do you believe the best platform is for us? See, I'm asking for information. I'm asking for opinions. I'm asking to find out where somebody is on something. But that's not the only channel. Some of us, that's our primary channel. That's the easiest channel for me to use is ask. And so the ask channel you can identify as somebody asks a question and the other person completes the channel by simply answering back to them. What time are we going to leave? 9 o'clock. How do you know when that channel is not working? Somebody says, what time are we going to leave? The response being, oh, well, that's a great question. We've had some different discussions about what time we should leave, and we're not quite sure if we should do it at 8 o'clock or if we'd be better doing it at 10 o'clock. In that moment, when you're observing that interaction, you know there is not a channel occurring right now. There is miscommunication happening. And so the ask channel is ask a question, give an answer. There's this back and forth of information. It's information. Another channel that you might run into is called play. And this is spontaneous and fun and energetic. It's like you see that friend of yours that you haven't seen for years and they wave at you and they holler your nickname. What are they looking for back from you? They're not looking for a simple, oh, hi, nice to see you. You know, if you see that happening, like this is not a channel. When they say, hey man, how's it going? What they want back to be in the channel is, oh, it's great to see you, man. I've been great. See, it's this playful, right? We're having fun. It's energetic. We're in the channel. We might also see care. Maybe somebody's parent is ill, or they're having some health issues. Care is offering this gift of nurturing to them, saying, oh, that must be really hard. And I want you to know that I am here for you if you need anything. That's care. See, that's different than, oh, wow, man, that's a bummer. That's play. Or, oh, how long has this been going on? That's ask. In that moment, when somebody needs to be nurtured, I'm going to use a different channel. And I'm going to give them a gift of my care, which is my emotion and my time and my attention. The fourth one is called tell. This is very direct and directive. I'm not necessarily telling people what activities to do, but in tell, there isn't anger, there isn't frustration. It's simply being very direct. So let's compare it to ask. Ask is, how many people are going to be at the meeting? It's a question seeking information. Tell is, tell me how many people are going to be at the meeting. Notice the difference there? It's directing somebody's thinking. It's saying, tell me how many people are going to be there. It's not a question. Take this report over to accounting. It's going to be very helpful for them. See, I'm just telling what needs to be done. It's not a question. And so we can encounter all four of these channels in our day-to-day interaction, and recognizing, hey, if somebody says, tell me what time we're leaving, that doesn't mean that they're bossing me around. It might mean that their easiest channel is tell. Now, from a statistics standpoint, only about 5% of North Americans have tell as their easiest, most natural channel. So there's different percentages in how often you're going to run into this, but our primary business channel is going to be ask. And I bring this up so that we can increase our awareness when it comes to how do we improve being heard? Well, we improve the odds of being heard by improving our ability to connect with others. And understanding their channels is a big part of that. Now, my final component that I want to spend some time on and around that comes up anytime you have more than two people involved in anything, two or more, we'll say, is the risk that drama can occur. So what's drama? We know it when we see it. It's that breakdown of communication. It's the assumption that maybe somebody else is out to get me. Whatever that comes up with, we know that drama occurs in families, among friend groups, among sports teams, among work teams. Drama exists. And it's a real issue. I mean, one study estimates that about 35 cents out of every payroll dollar gets spent dealing with drama. In the leaders that I talk with, when I ask them about their day-to-day time investment, how much of your time gets spent managing drama among your team and your company? It generally ranges between 30 and 70%. So drama is this inefficiency that just pulls us off our mission. It pulls us off our ability to be effective because it's this misdirected energy. That's what it really is. See, conflict isn't a bad thing. Conflict is really a great source of creativity and energy, and a lot of things are created because of healthy, positive conflict. Conflict is just when two things rub up against each other. The problem becomes when conflict occurs, it generates energy, and if we misdirect that energy, we end up creating drama. And so what we're going to talk about is some things to be aware of around us. See, all these pieces fit together. If I'm going to be heard, I need to make sure that I'm communicating in a clear, open way. And when I'm not, that can feed into and contribute to the drama of whatever group that I find myself a part of. And what I've found to be one of the most effective ways of thinking about the dynamics that go into drama and miscommunication something called Karpman's drama triangle. Dr. Karpman identified in his experience that whenever you have drama in an organization or in a group, there's typically needs to be 3 different roles being fulfilled. Now, that doesn't mean there's 3 types of people. I'm saying 3 roles need to be filled for us to really have good, lively drama going on. So I'm going to introduce these 3 different roles and talk about what are some of the dynamics that are happening, and to improve communication, what are some of the things that we can do if we find ourselves in that position, or maybe observe some of this happening, so that we increase the healthy communication around us. So think about a time, an experience you've had in your life where you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, there was a lot of drama in that group. Maybe it was a friend group, maybe it was someplace that you worked, could even be a church that you were a part of. Churches are not immune from drama. So you think about those situations, and I'm going to introduce these 3 positions that you're going to find. Obviously, for us to have drama, you need, just like when you think about the arts and you think about plays and you go back in time to the classic thoughts about Greek dramas, we need to have, we'll call him a bad guy, a persecutor. Somebody has been put into this role behaving in a way that is seen as persecuting of others. Now, here's the deal. In any drama, in any play, there has to be more than just one person. There has to be something that they're rubbing up against. Now, maybe that's nature, maybe, you know, there's some other type of force, but generally, the dramas that we watch have an interplay between people. And so it's hard to be a persecutor if you don't have a victim. Someone has to feel victimized, have a sense of victimization for there to be a really good drama. But here's the deal. That's going to give us our rub, our energy, our conflict, persecutor and victim. But if we only have those 2 roles, we don't yet have enough. It's not really drama yet. And so for us to really turn this into drama, we need a rescuer. Now we have 3 positions. We have all 3 corners of the triangle fulfilled. Again, these aren't necessarily people, but people slipping in and fulfilling the roles that are needed in each of these positions. So think about a situation, maybe the example you had in your mind. I'm going to make up a situation where maybe Frank is a leader at a company, and Frank at a meeting was frustrated at how Jim didn't deliver on something on time. And so Frank's communication with Jim was really direct, and he was pretty frustrated. And so in that moment, you got Frank up here, you got Jim down here, and there's some interaction between the 2 of them. Right? You got conflict. And so Frank spoke a certain way to Jim, but Jim leaves the meeting frustrated. Jim didn't say anything to Frank. He left the meeting frustrated. And a couple hours later, Jim runs into Amy and says, oh boy, Amy, I got to tell you, I don't know if you heard about it or not, but Frank was really hard on me in that meeting. And Amy says, oh my goodness, really? I'm so sorry to hear that. Would you like to talk about it? I mean, I'd be happy, you know, do you want to go for a coffee and talk more about, you know, how you're feeling and what's going on? And Jim says, ooh, you know what? That would be good. I would really appreciate that. And so Jim proceeds to regale his experience that he had with Frank. And you begin to see how this begins to progress, right? And the next day, Amy happens to have little conversation with Susan, you know, and says, "Oh boy, it sounded like Frank really lit Jim up in a meeting yesterday. I don't know if you heard about that." And Sue says, "No, I hadn't. Wow, that's interesting." And then Sue has a passing conversation in a meeting with three other people and says, "Yeah, boy, I guess I don't know what the deal is with Frank, but I guess he just really was hard on Jim." And before you know it, you've got all kinds of people that are informed. But how much of this does Frank know? So far, nothing, until one day someone happens to comment to Frank, "I hear that things aren't going so well with you and Jim." And Frank says, "What? What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about." And that's the first point that Frank is aware that there's been some sort of issue. This is drama. And so you can quickly begin to see how we're spending so much time in organizations, churches, families, companies, in all of this stuff that's going on. So what do we do? What's happening and what do we do? In that moment, there's this belief, there's these myths that are occurring that are perpetuating this. And so in that moment, you have Frank thinking that he's perfectly reasonable in how he's thinking about things. And his intention maybe in that conversation was to try to get Jim to do what he wanted him to do. And it's like, I know how to motivate him. I'm going to be really hard on him. And then maybe we'll get something done. And so there's this myth that I have the power over somebody else and how they feel. If I make him feel bad, then maybe he's going to get something done. So Frank's over there like trying to motivate some action, and Jim also believing a myth that other people can make me feel bad. And I move down this path of poor me. Frank's been so unfair to me. Doesn't he know how hard I've been working? And the rescuer, Amy says, I can make you feel good. So part of her identity is how she can make others feel, because I'm wise, I'm caring, I'm smart, I'm experienced. And if you just listen to me, then you're going to be better off. So then what happens? The victim says, "Oh, you know what? You can make me feel good. When I talk to you, I feel better. I feel so much better." And in this process, what's happening is nothing but miscommunication. And so what can we do? If we find ourselves in this situation, if we find ourselves wanting to move our people around us out of this situation, what can I do? Well, if I'm the persecutor, I need to get better on establishing clear expectations. I need to make sure that the people that I'm working with know, what is it that I'm expecting? When am I expecting it by? And it isn't about them, failing or ignoring me. It's about me saying, it isn't about me. It's about what do we have to get done? And I have to spend a little bit more time making sure that I'm clear, and also making sure that people know what they're responsible for delivering. If I find myself in the rescuer mode, it's recognizing that I can't make other people's problems my own. I can listen, but I can't be a perpetual I can't be a perpetual listener. I have to box it. I have to say, I will give you 10 minutes, but here's the deal. The best response when the victim comes to the rescuer, this is how you stop the drama triangle. The rescuer says, what did Frank say when you talked to him about this issue? And Jim says, I haven't talked to Frank. That position has to be able to say, the only way for you to resolve this issue is you need to speak with Frank about how you're feeling and what happened. When will you do that? I need you to talk to him. And so what the rescuer is doing is saying, I'm here for you and I can help you problem solve and think through ways that you can deal with this. But we can't just talk about the problem forever. You have to do things. You have to take action. And so for the victim, they have to recognize they have the ability, recognize their own ability to solve the problem. They have the resources. They have the capability. And they need the courage and encouragement and support to solve their own problems and take responsibility for how they're feeling. Does this mean that if you have a bad actor in an organization that they shouldn't be dealt with? Absolutely not. If you have bullies, if you have persecutors that are behaving badly, they need to be addressed swiftly. What I'm referring to here is typically the drama we experience in different situations comes from maybe somebody being overly direct or frustrated at the lack of delivery and expectations of somebody else. And then that victim feeling bad, but not wanting to talk to the person that they're frustrated with. But rather they talk to somebody else. So it's this issue that we have to be able to share with others our frustration in healthy ways so that we can have positive, healthy, productive conflict and move out of these roles that we so easily can take on. Are we gonna perfectly solve drama in our lives? No. But recognizing that there's things that we can do and things that we can be aware of to positively impact that can really be empowering, can really help our organization improve. What do we do when we have conflict? How do we solve it in positive, healthy ways? So here's a reflection question for you. When you think about where you find yourself in your life, whether that's with family, coworkers, the community, and you think about improving communication, what's one thing that you could change? What's one thing that you could do differently that could help increase the likelihood that you feel heard, but even more importantly, the likelihood that you help others around you feel like they've been heard? Because every time we positively impact that, we're increasing the capacity of our communication and our connection with others. And when we do that, we increase our influence as well. So hopefully there's some thoughts that you can put to work yet today to improve communication, improve problem solving, improve confidence, increase the likelihood of taking action. And if you have any things that you'd like to talk with me about, this is how you can get a hold of me. So my email is dean@clarisresults.com. Email me anytime. If you're a LinkedIn person, you can find me, just search for Dean Heffta on LinkedIn. Give me a follow. I also have a weekly podcast called Communication on Point, where I talk about communication insights, and I have guests on talking about different approaches. And feel free to stay in touch by sending me an email. So with that, I guess, Kim, I'll turn it back to you. I don't know if there's any questions or things that you would like to add or clarify. I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome, Dean. Those were some very good points. I know that there were some, Ben had a question in the chat. that we'll want to make sure we get to. Some of the points were, let me go back up. Ben has a couple of questions here, but question for later. Could you give examples of how and what questions in place of why questions? Did he miss some? Yeah,
Excellent.
so like what questions in place of why questions?
That's a great question, because when we hear that, it's like, well, what else should I say? And when you think about it, every why question can be replaced with a what or how question. So it's like, why were you late? Well, how might we ask that with a what or how?
I get that question a lot.
Yeah, right. What happened? What came up that you're late? Was there something you need from me to keep you from being late? You know, anything can be changed to, you know, why did we lose that tool? Okay, well, what can we change so that that doesn't happen again? See, what and how focus on how do we solve this and prevent it. Why is I want names or reasons, or I want you to defend yourself. So I think about it as, and it takes, here's what I'll say is, never totally get rid of the question, but it increases your awareness of, in this moment, I just asked a why question. How could I ask that in a different way that doesn't invite maybe the defensiveness that I'm experiencing? Is that helpful, Ben?
Yes, it is. Good. And I had another question in the chat there. What's one thing a person do to be heard if they're not being heard? You challenged us to think about that, but some ideas for somebody who feels like I'm not being heard, what could they do?
Yeah, so certainly that's very, very contextual, you know, in different situations where I don't feel like I'm being heard. And I think it begins with the self-realization and reflection of, okay, I don't feel like I'm being heard right now. What might be happening? Is it because I'm not, there's so many reasons people might feel that. It might be, I'm waiting for somebody to ask for my thoughts on this and they haven't asked me, right? So I'm waiting. It could be, I'm over explaining something and so people have gotten lost in the details. It could be that maybe I'm not first identifying the hook or the draw or the big why. So what's interesting about the why word is, while I should use it as a question as little as possible, I should connect my comments to the why as much as possible. So if I focus on minutia or things or ideas that people can't see the impact of, or the why behind it, I might not be delivering the level of impact that I desire. The other thing that I can do is have a conversation with somebody. Maybe there's somebody that I never feel like I can get through to them. And being able to have a candid, honest conversation out of sincere curiosity, saying, I'm continually wanting to get better in my communication. And one of the things that I notice, this may not be true at all, but often in certain situations, I don't feel like I'm heard. Is that true? Are there things that I could be doing differently? Because other people may not be aware. So I might feel like I'm the only one that person doesn't hear. But when we really get into it, that's just how they interact with the world around them. They don't hear. And so sometimes by just having the conversation and saying, I don't feel like I get heard when I'm in these situations. What can I do differently? Now we begin having dialogue because it is very situational and it's based on my perception. Do I perceive that I'm not being heard? And can I have that conversation with the person rather than it, you know, getting buried into me and feeling resentment? Because here's the deal. It is my responsibility to get my needs met. And so if my need is to be more heard, it means that I need to be able to reach out to the people that I don't feel heard by and say, how do I change how we're interacting? That's up to me. That's my responsibility.
Good. And I'm kind of asking that in our industry of motor coach, the majority of our company is gone most of the time when it's not COVID-19 season. And so that is a complaint that we've heard from drivers is, you know, we don't communicate well, or we don't hear from you. And I think that goes both ways. There's a responsibility for them to say, you know, I think they may be stuck on the drama track rather than going to the source of whatever their point is. So that's good advice. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you bring that up, because, you know, physicians will talk about presenting problems. A patient comes in and says, I've got this pain in my back. Can you give me a pill to take the pain away? A good physician says, let's do some work first. And maybe they do some measuring, and they come to find out that one leg is a little bit different length than the other leg. And they realize that the patient came presenting a problem. And if they stop there and address the problem with the painkiller, they're actually not getting to the root of the issue. And that maybe an insert in the shoe helps them avoid getting onto painkillers. And so the same thing happens in our organization or in our families. People come to us and it's like, I need to reflect and really dive in. What is the real issue? So it might be someone says to me, I need more communication from you. I said, oh, well, that's my chance to get curious. So I say, okay, cool. What are some of the things that you would like to be more informed about? Because if I don't dive deeper, I run the risk of going off on my own and trying to solve the problem, saying, oh, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll send out a text message every day. That might not even address it. So I want to find out, what is it that you're needing? What else? That's another powerful question. What else? Okay, so maybe the question isn't really about, I need more communication. It might be, I can equip you with some information that you're going to need that maybe we haven't been doing. And so it's getting curious and working with them to get them more of what they need, and diving into what is it that you really need, and what are some creative ways that we can get that to you. Because just like companies, you could say that you guys are a remote working company because people are out and about. Any company that is a remote working company has to be extremely intentional about their communication channels and what information needs to be able to be accessed to whom. See, if you're all in an office, things happen kind of accidentally by bouncing around. We bounce into each other. You have to intentionally create the channels for getting information out when you're not able to bounce into each other. And that's really a systems approach to distributing information that people need.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments for Dean?
Very helpful. Appreciate that. The whole thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you very much. I think that this is something that will be very beneficial for all of our employees to hopefully watch at one time.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so that way